Hi everybody, my name's Sarah and this is my channel, So Sarah Sewed. In today's video, I am excited to show you everything I made in the month of November. Now, November, I was back at work, my children were back at school, and all of our co-curricular activities were back up and running again. So I wasn't able to do as much sewing as I thought I'd be able to. It's been a little bit of a challenge getting back into the swing of all of our activities, but I have made a few things. So I'll get started with what I'm wearing today. This is a free pattern. It's the Galaxy Tee by Pattern Scissors Cloth, and I've made a couple of them before this one. I find it a really great pattern to follow and a very comfortable and practical style for me. This one I have made in a bamboo jersey that I bought from My Design. It's a really lovely soft fabric with beautiful drape, and I think it works because this pattern has these puffed sleeves. It just works really well to sort of drape over these cuffs that are on the sleeves as well. I'll stand up and show you a bit more. So as usual, I've got this tucked in quite high to my ninny culottes, but if I was to untuck it, it's quite a long length. And actually, the pattern says that you need 1.1 meters of your fabric for the size that I made. And I think I only bought 1 meter because I knew that I didn't need the full length. So I took a little bit off the length as well to make this one. So the Galaxy Tee sizes are based on your bust measurement with a range from 80 centimeters to 122 centimeters. I made a 96 centimeters, which equates to a roughly 38 inches. My bust measurement's around 38 to 39 inches generally. As you can see from the fit, it's a little bit fitted around the bust and then a very relaxed fit after that. I really enjoy wearing this one to work because it's a really nice way to wear a comfortable t-shirt yet still look quite professional. I made another bamboo top this month, also with bamboo jersey from My Design, but unfortunately this one was not as successful as my Galaxy Tee. It's made in this really lovely light brown color, and unfortunately I damaged the fabric when I was ironing it. It seems to react negatively to heat, and I wasn't aware of that. So unfortunately, right in the middle of the top, there's quite a strong line that you can see very, very clearly where it got damaged with the iron. So this was a Floreat top. It's a pattern by Megan Nielsen, and the Floreat can be made as a dress or a top, and I made one actually in October too. So I was looking for my patterns and I found that I had the Floreat top cut out on the size 10 line. Now actually my measurements put me much further, much closer to the size 14 measurement. So I thought, well, rather than just throwing out this pattern that's cut on the size 10 line, because the pattern can be made in knit or woven, I thought the size 10 line might actually work quite well with a knit, given that I don't need the same amount of positive ease when working with knit. So I made a top in October, which you can see in my October makes, and I thought I'd make a short sleeved one in November. It was a great plan, but unfortunately, as I ruined the fabric, I haven't been able to wear it. It might be something that I sort of wear around the house when I'm desperate for something. But apart from that, I guess it was just a good lesson. I made sure when I was making this Galaxy Tee that I did not iron it at all. Just straight after washing it and putting it on the line, it actually doesn't crease very much at all. And with a little bit of body heat, any creases kind of disappear anyway. So I won't be ironing bamboo again, and that's a tip for everyone. If you have not tried working with bamboo before, I recommend not ironing it, or if you're going to, use a some kind of protective cloth, or perhaps the very lowest ironing setting if you absolutely must iron it. I will take some photos so you can see what this top is supposed to look like, but at the front it has an asymmetrical piece that goes down into sort of a triangular shape, which can be just worn as it is, or it can be tied in a knot for a different look. This pattern comes in 2 size bands, the first being size 0 to 20 and the other being the curve range from 14 to 30. The size 0 is a bust of 32, waist 24 and hips 34 inches, with the size 30 being bust 56, waist 48 and hips 58 inches. I really like this top and the style of this top, so I will try and make another one day, but being a lot more careful with my fabric. I made another Floreat this month, but this time the Floreat dress and in a woven fabric. It is a design by Dupes Designs here in Australia, and it's called More's Garden, which a viewer informed me, I believe, means grandmother's garden. So it's a really beautiful print, and it's one that I'd been eyeing off for a long time. And when they released it in a cotton satin, I snapped some up, but at the time I did not know what I was going to make with it, so I only bought 2 meters. Now 2 meters is not a lot when you end up deciding that you want to make a dress, which I did. And I'll put in some video because it's a print that sort of runs all the way from top to the bottom of the fabric, and I did not want to interrupt this design. So I really thought long and hard about what I was going to make with this. And it was when I was rifling through all of my patterns that I rediscovered this Floreat pattern, which is just one really long front piece. There's no seams from the shoulders all the way down to the bottom. And I thought that would be perfect for this dress. Because it is an asymmetrical design and it's quite wide, this A-line shape, I did not have enough to fit it on the 2 meters easily. So I did have to sort of bring it in slightly on the sides. And I also had to think carefully about how I was going to put the back pieces together. I certainly couldn't have them lining up in a way that the print would match. There was no way that was going to happen, but I don't think it matters having sort of 2 different sides on the back, and I think it looks quite effective. So I'll show you. So I made the short sleeved version with these quite short little sleeves, and it does up with a hook and eye at the back. I don't think my hook and eye, I think I could probably use a bit more practice putting in hooks and eyes. I did not do a very good job of that, but it does up, and that's all that matters. I also put a little Kylie and the Machine label in there. Perfectly imperfect. It's definitely not perfect, but I love it. So as I mentioned, this pattern comes in a size range from 0 to 30. I decided to go with a size 14 for this one. The size 14 has measurements of bust 40 inches, waist 32, and hip 42 inches. My waist and hip measurements are around those kinds of measurements. My bust has usually been between around 38 to 39 inches, but I had made the Sudley blouse recently in a size 12, and it probably just felt like it was a little bit snug around the bust, and I thought it was probably worth giving myself that just a little bit extra room around the bust, so I made the size 14. There's a lot of ease around the hips and the waist, and it didn't really matter so much those measurements, but it was the bust one that was really important. This dress ends up being very, very long, and I didn't want it to be too long, and also I didn't have the fabric to be able to make it very long either. In order to get the pattern to fit on my fabric and also to end up at a length that I was really happy with, I decided to cut the back at the size 10 length, and then at the front I cut at the size 6 line. So it doesn't have that same really, really deep triangle that it would have if I'd gone on the size 14. It's a little bit less emphasized, but I still really am happy with the shape. One thing that surprised me actually with this one was that I don't have the range of movement in the arms that I would have expected. So it feels a little bit restricted when I move my arms up. It's not really noticeable when I'm just standing still, but it did surprise me that I do have a little bit of tightness across sort of the chest area, or maybe it's the shoulders, because I had made the Sudley blouse, which is the same pattern designer, in a size 12, and I had none of those issues. So I'm surprised that the size 14 in this pattern felt a little bit tighter. This dress can actually be made sleeveless, or with short sleeved, or with long sleeves. So it might even be the way the sleeves are attached, the exact placement of the sleeves, that just makes it a little bit less free around the arms. At least it does for me. I'd be interested to know if anyone else has had that experience with this pattern. All in all, I'm so happy with my choice of the pattern for this fabric. I've been in love with this fabric for ages, and I can't wait to start wearing this dress. I haven't had the opportunity yet, so I'm looking forward to perhaps wearing it this Christmas, or for some fun event coming up over the summer. All right, so from one Dupes Designs dress and onto another. I also bought a cotton satin in this Spells fabric on a dark navy background. This is another fabric that I have loved and loved for months and finally bought this year when they did a new fabric release. So as you can see, it's an incredibly busy and interesting design. There are a lot of things going on in this print. I think my favorite one is this little colorful bird here. And so it was really important when I was deciding on a pattern, again, that it would just really highlight the print, not interrupt it too much, and yeah, not take away from it. So I decided to make the Hope dress by Stylark. It was my very first Stylark pattern that I've tried. I've seen so many beautiful versions of the Hope dress on Instagram, and I wanted to try one myself. So the Hope dress has a rather fitted bodice with raglan sleeves and then a gathered skirt. Now in the pictures on the pattern, it looks like there are two different skirt length options, but when I actually read the instructions, there are no mentions, there's no lines on the pattern pieces for short version or long version. Rather, there just is a shorten here, shorten or lengthen here, and I guess you can just choose any length you like based on that. I had heard that Stylark pattern instructions are a little bit less detailed than other independent pattern companies, and so I was a little bit prepared for that, but at the same time I did struggle a little bit with the pattern instructions, and I definitely prefer to have my hand held and have much more detailed instructions than these were. I also found the way they were formatted, it was all just, I bought the digital version and there was no just separate file for the instructions. So it was kind of awkward to be sort of zooming into just these, the way they'd had the instructions placed in the file. I just found a little bit difficult to read. I ended up printing it out and that was a lot easier to read, whereas I'm usually someone who reads pattern instructions off my iPad or phone because pretty much all the instructions all the patterns I buy are digital. So the Hope dress can be made in either woven or knit fabrics, and it's available in sizes 4 to 30, with the smallest size being recommended for a bust of around 30 inches, waist 23.5 and hips 32.6 inches. And the size 30 being bust 58.25, waist 50.5 and hips 61 inches. So I decided to go with a size 14 when I made mine, and that was based on the finished measurements. So when I was looking at the size chart, the size 12 was recommended for a bust size of 38.2 inches with a finished bust measurement of 39.75, whereas a 14 was a bust measurement of 40.2 and a finished measurement of 41.75 inches. So there was really only 1.5 inches of ease in the bust, and I was just a little bit worried that that wouldn't be enough, especially given that I've recently made a couple of dresses, including the Floreat dress, where I just felt like I didn't have quite enough movement and I was worried that was going to happen again. So I decided to go with the size 14. I think I really could have fit into the size 12. There's plenty of room, but I think having that little bit of extra room just makes it quite an easy and breezy kind of style to wear. I ended up making it sort of about just above calf length, I suppose, when I was hemming my version. And I finished the dress on the back with a large purple button. You're supposed to make like a little loop out of fabric that you use for the dress, but it's barely even noticeable. And I just found some pre-made bias tape that I had to make it instead. I can actually pull this dress over my head without undoing the button. So if I was to make this pattern again, I probably wouldn't even bother with this section. The sleeves are finished with an elasticized cuff, and they're pretty comfortable to wear either down or easy to pull up if you want them a bit shorter. And then of course it has lovely deep pockets. Now these are some of the instructions that I found very difficult to understand, could not get my head around them, and in the end I just went with a standard pocket construction that I had used when I've made Winslow culottes by Helen's Closet, and I just forgot about trying to figure out what these Hope instructions were. I made one more Megan Nielsen pattern this month, and that was the Jarrah Sweater. I made this in a French terry from Nerida Hansen Fabrics, and the designer is the Scenic Route. And it's this beautiful fabric with native Australian plants and some little animals in there as well. Birds. And then I used a ribbing from my design for the neckline and for the cuffs. Now for this sweater, there are a few different variations that you can mix and match. So I used variation A for the neckline and the ribbing, and variation B for this curved curved hemline, and the shorter front and the longer at the back. The pattern is rated a difficulty of 1 out of 5, and it was pretty easy. I did find it a lot easier than the first time I tried to make it, which was 18 months ago, and it was the very first garment I tried to make on my machine when I started sewing last year. I understood all of the instructions a lot better this time around. The pattern comes in that same size range as the Floreat dress, so a size 0 to size 30, and I can't remember if I made a 12 or a 14, but I will include that in text just here as well. So this one, what I really like about it is the neckline. It's a very comfortable neckline. It doesn't go too high up. But what I have found I don't like so much about it is the cuffs. They're a little bit wide. It's really, really comfortable for me when I pull them up. I find that very comfortable. But when they're full length, I just find them a little bit loose around my wrists, and I would prefer them to be a little bit more snug around my wrists for comfort there. But I've been finding this to be a really nice and comfortable jumper to be throwing on in the evenings or on the weekends, and it's had a lot of wear already. My next make is actually not a completely new make, but rather a refashioning of something I made about a year ago. So I made the Cielo top by Closet Core Patterns about this time last year, but I made the dress version. So this is a pattern that comes in, you can make it as a top, you can make it with short sleeves, or you can make it with these sort of lantern sleeves. And so I tried making the lantern sleeve dress version, but unfortunately I did not grade as I should have between my waist and my hips, and it was a little bit tight around my hips. It's actually also a very, very short dress, and for someone who is only 160 centimeters tall as myself, if you're even taller, this would be incredibly short. So keep that in mind if you're ever to make the Cielo dress. So I have never worn this dress apart from when I took photos of it about a year ago, and I thought it was probably time to just chop it off and turn it into a top instead. There is nothing different about the top and the dress in the version that I made. I made the one without the pockets. So really it was just a case of chopping it at the length that I wanted and then re-hemming it. So I'll take some photos and I'll insert them here. This is a really, really great pattern, and for me, it came with a course, I think it's called the Learn to Sew course or Sewing for Beginners course or something like that on the Closet Core website, and that course came with 3 patterns: the Pietra pants, the Cielo top, and the Fiore skirt. And the Cielo top was the very first thing I made, and watching the videos that are also included was just the best way to build up my skills. I would highly recommend this course for anyone who is a beginner or looking to have a better understanding of all those little terms that you'll see in sewing patterns, because it meant that going forward, after I'd done, I made the Cielo top and the Pietra pants. I haven't made the Fiore skirt yet, but those two, following those 2 patterns and the instructions provided on the video really did set me up to be confident at approaching pretty much any beginner pattern I could find going forward. This is quite a boxy kind of fit. Even though my measurements would put me more into a size 12 or 14, I think, for this pattern, I made a size 10, but it fits perfectly well. It's quite wide around the neckline. It's easy to slip on. There are no closures. And then it's got, as I mentioned, these kind of lantern sleeves, so a bit puffy at the top, and then they go out like this. And I'll hopefully find some more opportunities to wear it now that it's a top. The fabric I used for this is a cotton sateen that I purchased from Nerida Hansen about 18 months ago. And the last project I finished in November was a knitting project. I actually finished knitting this one up in October, but I didn't sew the buttons on until November, so it officially clocked over into November when I finished this one. It is the Novice Cardigan Chunky Edition by Petite Knit Patterns. I have made a few Petite Knit patterns this year, the Holiday Slipover and the Novice Sweater Mohair Edition, and this was the first cardigan I've ever tried to make. It was pretty enjoyable. I used circular needles for most of it, and I used 2 of the yarns that were recommended by the designer. So the yarns that I used for this one were a thicker yarn called Cos by Sandness Garn, and I used the colour Brunt Zucker, which I believe means burnt sugar. And then I had to use also a silk mohair as well, and I used the Tilia by Phil Kalana brand, I think, and I used a colour called Latte for that. And together they combined to create this kind of colour. You can see the different strands sort of in there. My measurements put me between a medium and a large for this one. I decided to go with a size large, and it's quite, I mean, there's plenty of room in it, but it doesn't feel too oversized. It's very, very warm and very comfortable. There's a lovely soft combination of wool actually in this in these 2 yarns. I really enjoyed knitting this. I learned a few new techniques that I hadn't done before. One of them being buttonholes, which were much simpler than I thought were going to be, and doing that placket, knitting a placket for buttons. Now, what I didn't do very well was know how to pick up the stitches to create the placket. So on one side, the second side, I did a really lovely job, and you can see it's quite a straight line. But on the first side, I did not pick up enough. And you can see it's a bit wonky at the bottom, but hopefully no one else notices that. It's just something that I'll remember for future placket making. The buttons I used are by Kylie and the Machine, and they're these beautiful shell buttons, which I think go beautifully. Sometimes when I put this on, I sort of think, I wonder if I look a little bit like a gingerbread man. Hopefully no one else thinks that. The other thing I would maybe do differently, if I could figure it out, was with the cuffs. I finished with a stretchy bind off. I used Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off, which I was recommended, but it does end up meaning that they're quite loose cuffs, which in some ways is good. I can get them on easily, but it doesn't have that sort of nice tight cuff feeling or look that I would have preferred. I also think that I probably got excited and ended my sleeves a bit soon, and I probably could have done with maybe an extra inch on each sleeve. So that brings me to the end of all of my makes in November. I hope you enjoyed seeing them, and if you did, it would be great if you could give this video a like. I always love hearing from you in the comments, so if you'd like to leave a comment, please do below, and otherwise I will see you in my next video. Thank you so much for watching.